Hello, everyone. My name is Jeremiah Rakowski. I'm a regional assistant director for American University. I live in Southern California, recruit in Southern California, but my university actually is all the way on the East Coast in Washington, D.C. But this presentation today is, what does it mean to be a test option? In the world that we're in today, many colleges are considering becoming test optional or test flexible in some way in light of COVID-19. In fact, according to fairtest.org, over 50% of colleges in the nation this year are considering being test optional for the fall 2021 application. And this presentation is to give you some insight on the many variations of test optional and things that you should consider as you're applying to different schools. Maybe they're becoming test optional for that first year, things you might want to think about. Maybe they've been test optional for a while, and just understanding what does that mean to you as an applicant so that you feel more prepared in the process. The first thing you really need to understand is that there's different types of test optional. So not all test optional schools are the same. The university I work for is American University. We have been test optional since 2011. And the very first type of test optional there at the top, test optional, where there's an option of applying without submitting standardized test scores with no questions asked and nothing additional required. That's the type of test optional that American University is. This is probably the most common type of test optional. And I know that a lot of the colleges that are thinking about switching just for this application year in light of COVID-19 and the issues with being able to take the standardized test are going full test optional for this application year. So more than likely you'll be able to apply to those schools without needing to submit those scores at all. And that won't harm you at all in the process. For my university, it's just like I just mentioned. It's a simple yes or no question. Nothing else is required of you. You can choose whether you want to apply that way or not. We don't ask you to submit additional essay, to send in additional documents, or take our own individual tests. We just want you to decide what you think is your best option as an applicant. There's also test blind, and test blind is where they're not required ever to apply to the university or school. They do not ever consider standardized test scores as part of the application. There are many colleges that are like that. They're more focused on GPA, rigor, and the rest of the application process. These schools are farther and fewer between, but there is a handful of those schools out there. There's also test flexible. Schools that fall in the test flexible category allow you to substitute your standardized test scores with other credentials such as SAT 2 subject tests, grade writing samples, or advanced placement test scores. Some schools may also have their own thing that you submit. Maybe it's an additional essay, but they're just deciding that they'll allow you to take the standardized test scores out of the equation, but there are some other marking points that they want to take a look at to consider you for admission. And the last type of testing optional, testing flexible is test conditional. And in this instance, schools that are test conditional, they waive the need for the standardized test scores if the applicant meets certain minimum conditions. Some examples would be maybe they have a threshold of a 3.3 GPA. If you're above the 3.3 GPA, you don't need to submit standardized test scores. Another option would be being within the top 10% of your school, your high school, if some schools are like that there. And again, probably the remaining three on this list, the test blind, the test flexible, the test conditional, there's less schools like this in the overall group of test optional colleges, but there are a number of them out there, and you have to be aware of these different types because they are different, and you just want to make sure you know what you're doing when you're applying to those schools. So why would you apply test optional? I'm going to give you kind of two perspectives. From the student, if you're a student considering applying test optional, the reason you might want to do that is because it gives you options. You know, some schools, the standardized test scores of their admitted students, you can look at their middle 50% or their averages, they're fairly high. And you'll usually see that at fairly selective schools. And perhaps you're a high GPA student, but you're not a student that has done so well on standardized test scores. Don't worry about that. Lots of students are that way. And so you can choose at some of these schools whether to take those scores out, and it kind of falls right in line with the next point. It allows you to put your best foot forward as an applicant, and that's something that I think is great for an applicant. It gives you some control in selling yourself and making sure that the colleges that you're applying to see the best version of you. And honestly, you spend 4 years from a freshman to a senior in high school, trying to challenge yourself with the best curriculum you can, studying late nights for your tests and homework. And you work really hard to earn the GPA that shows up semester after semester. And so, honestly, if a few Saturdays in the fall, your junior year or senior year, result in lower standardized test scores than you're happy with, and you'd rather have colleges look at just your overall body of work, your writing ability, the different activities and community service you've been involved in, what your recommenders have to say about you, then finding test optional schools where you can take the scores out of the equation, that really can help you as an applicant, and in some instances make you more competitive for admission. And I also recognize how stressful the application process is. I have a junior in college myself, and I saw firsthand just how stressful the college application process was. On top of that, you have to study for all your classes. You're trying to have a social life. You're a teenager that has to deal with parents and siblings and maybe a job and all your different things that are pulling you in different directions. And so the thought of studying for standardized test scores that happen on the weekend when it's your free time, not during the week when you're in school, that can be really stressful. And so for some students, taking that stress out of the application process, it's a real blessing. And so that can also be a reason why you do it. And then, of course, COVID-19 is causing issues, and many of the testing sites, just because of the social distancing requirements, are canceling the test dates and are not allowing students to take the test. And so perhaps just taking the test in general is a barrier for you. That's why so many colleges for the fall 2021 term are removing the test scores as a requirement in the application process, because we're recognizing on the college side that it's a barrier for you this year, that COVID-19 is causing this issue and you're not able to take the test, or when you took the test, there are other factors at home that were more stressful than usual and you didn't get the score that you were looking for, or you weren't able to study like you were normally going to be able to study. And so that would be a reason for a student to apply test option, just removing some of those obstacles and giving you an opportunity to put your best foot forward. On the university or college side, the main reason American University went test optional is we wanted to eliminate an application barrier. And at the same time, that would hopefully increase the amount of applications that we receive, and also allow for a more diverse applicant pool. Standardized tests are not all equal from every student in America. Some students get more access to tutoring, more access to private tutoring, and just classes to prepare them for the test, and just have more support at home or in school in order to prepare for the test. And so when we eliminate the standardized test as part of the application process, we feel we're creating an equal opportunity for all applicants to apply to the best of their abilities to our school. And so that's the main reason why we get rid of the applications. And since we've been test optional in American since 2011, our own statistics show that being test optional is allowed for a more diverse applicant pool. Students that maybe didn't think they had a shot at applying towards American or getting into American because of low standardized test scores are looking at our middle 50% range or our averages of our GPA and standardized test scores, knowing that if they take the standardized test scores out of the equation and look just at GPA and everything else that they're doing on their activities and their writing ability, they're like, hey, I actually have a shot at that university and I don't have to stop myself from applying there just because of low test scores. I can actually apply there and shoot my shot. And so Uh, it's working for us. It's working for a lot of schools. And honestly have a feeling after this next year, many of the schools that went test optional or test flexible for this applicant year will enjoy the process. They'll see an uptick in the applications. They'll see that most of the students that apply test optional are on the kind of same playing field as those that submitted standardized test scores. That's something I don't at all notice a difference in between test optional applicants and those that submit their standardized test scores at American. It's not a drastic difference between those two applicants. You know, the writing ability is very much the same. The transcripts often look very similar. And so you know, it's just low test scores often. And using my daughter as an example that I brought up earlier, she was one of those very high GPA students that challenged herself year after year with APs and honors courses. And she was fortunate enough to be able to have private tutoring for the standardized test scores. But no matter how much she studied, no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't get her standardized test scores to increase that much. And even though her GPA could have her apply to really any college in America just because of how competitive she was. Her standardized test scores, when you compare them to the averages of many selected institutions, it wouldn't have allowed her to be competitive for admission, or it would take her out of merit scholarship competition. And so she applied to a number of test optional colleges because it removed that obstacle and it made her more competitive. So it's a win-win typically for the student and the colleges if you allow students the option of getting rid of standardized test scores. And so, you know, I appreciate you watching this short video on becoming test optional. I hope you learned something. Bottom line, there are questions you need to ask. If you are applying to 10 different colleges and they all have different testing policies, maybe one's test flexible, one's test optional, test blind, some of them require the standardized test scores. Make sure you're asking those colleges. Make sure you're reaching out to the admissions staff at those different colleges, or maybe the individual person that reads your application and covers your particular area that you live in, and ask them about their testing policy and the requirement of standardized test scores. If it's a college that's brand new to being test optional just for this year in 2021 because of COVID-19, I can assure you, I've been in webinars this summer and meetings. Those colleges are doing their due diligence. They're researching how colleges in the past that are test optional, flexible have been successful, how they did their process, how they reviewed applications. They're having internal discussions and trainings with their staff, and they'll continue to have those as they read applications. And then there'll be calibration checkpoints with their staff to make sure they understand what they're reviewing of those students. And so, you know, nothing will be overlooked in your application. You'll get your fair shot at these different colleges. But it's important to do your research to make sure you truly understand the process. And hopefully you find that with the different test options that we'll have this year, that you have a few more schools that you can apply to. And the last thing I'll leave with you is one thing I don't want you to take away from this presentation is the thought that your standardized test scores are bad. That's false. There really aren't bad standardized test scores. There's just some colleges have averages of their admitted students where the standardized test scores are higher. So again, that's part of your process as a prospective student and prospective applicant at these different colleges, is to make sure you're applying to schools where you fit within their applicant pool. Typically, we're showing you, when we show you our averages or our middle 50%, this is the types of students that we admit at our schools. And so you just want to make sure you're doing your due diligence and creating a list of colleges that fit within your GPA, within your standardized test scores. And hopefully now with this year and many colleges already being test optional, you'll start to become more comfortable in looking into those schools because it can increase the amount of schools that you can apply to and give you more options. And that's really what we all want for you. Thanks for watching my presentation. I wish you luck this year. Have a great day.